All right, so the last part I talked a lot about morality. The book talks a lot about morality. And now it will bring us right back to where I started to complain about masonry. It's going to touch on how people should be free but obey the law and obey authority, and that people should be subjugated by the wisest and the smartest. I don't remember the words that you. But it's going to get to that. I briefly scanned over these, to prepare myself for this video. Let me start reading. Like 5 pages to go, and so I'm gonna have to read pretty quickly to fit this in this last 15 minutes. Anyway, so I was talking about, okay, and let him, the ever-living God, be always present in thy mind, for thy mind itself is his likeness, for it too is invisible and impalpable, and without form. As he exists forever, so thou also, when thou shalt have put off this which is visible and corruptible, shalt stand before him forever, living and endowed with knowledge. As a matter far above comprehension, and in the Hebrew Genesis the words that are used to express the origin of things are of uncertain meaning, and with equal propriety may be translated by the word generated, produced, made, or created. We need not dispute nor debate whether the soul or spirit of man be a ray that has emanated or flowed forth from the supreme intelligence, or whether the infinite power hath called each into existence from nothing, by a mere exertion of his will, and endowed it with immortality and with intelligence like unto the divine intelligence. For in either case it may be said that in man the divine is united to the human. Of this union the equilateral triangle inscribed within the square is a symbol. We see the soul, Plato said, as men see the statue of Glaucus, recovered from the sea wherein it had laid many years, which viewing it was not easy, if possible, discern with what was its original nature, its limbs having been partly broken and partly worn, and by defacement changed, by the action of the waves and shells, weeds, and pebbles adhering to it, so that it more resembles some strange monster than that which it was when it left its divine source. Even so, he said, we see the soul deformed by innumerable things that have done it harm, have mutilated and defaced it. But the mason who hath the royal secret can also with him argue, from beholding its love of wisdom, its tendency toward association with what is divine and immortal, its larger aspirations, its struggles, though they may have ended in defeat, with the impediments and enthrallments of the senses and the passions, that when it shall have been rescued from the material environments that now prove too strong for it, and be freed from the deforming and disfiguring accretions that here adhere to it, it will again be seen in the true nature, and by degrees ascend by the mystic ladder of the spheres to its home and place of origin. The royal secret of which you are prince, if you are a true adept, if knowledge seems to you advisable, and philosophy is for you radiant with a divine beauty, is that which the Sohar terms the mystery of the balance. It is the secret of the universal equilibrium. Of that equilibrium in the deity between the infinite divine wisdom and the infinite divine power, from which result the stability of the universe, the unchangeableness of the divine law, and the principles of truth, justice, and right which are part of it, and the supreme obligation to the divine law upon all men as the superior to all other law, and forming a part of all laws of men and nations. Of that equilibrium also between the infinite divine justice and the infinite divine mercy, the result of which is the infinite divine equity, and the moral harmony or beauty of the universe. By it the endurance of created and imperfect natures in the presence of a perfect deity is made possible, and for him also as for us, to love is better than to hate, and forgiveness is wiser than revenge or punishment. Of that equilibrium between necessity and liberty, between the action of the divine omnipotence and the free will of man, by which vices and base actions and ungenerous thoughts and words are crimes and wrongs, justly punished by the law of cause and consequence, though nothing in the universe can happen or be done contrary to the will of God, and without which coexistence of liberty and necessity, of free will in the creature and omnipotence of the Creator, there could be no religion, nor any law of right and wrong, or merit and demerit, nor any justice in human punishments or penal laws. Of that equilibrium between good and evil, and light and darkness in the world, which assures us all us that all is the work of the infinite wisdom and of an infinite love, and there is no rebellious demon of evil or principle of darkness coexistent and in internal controversy with God, or the principle of light and of good, by attaining the knowledge of which equilibrium we can through faith see that the existence of evil, sin, suffering, and sorrow in the world is consistent with the infinite goodness as well as with the infinite wisdom of the Almighty. I don't think you people hear me. I mean, I really have to stop there. I was going to just finish it and explain, but this is fucking key. My goodness, it goes back to everything I say about Masonry. All my complaints are confirmed. Within a whole lot of, intellectual jargon is how a lot of you will see it, but I understand because I'm pretty good with words. And, but in the mix of a lot of talk, a lot of, pretty eloquent talk about morality, there is a lot of demonic nonsense. This guy, he flat out said, there is no rebellious demon of evil or principle of darkness coexistent and in internal controversy with God, or the principle of light and of good, but by attaining to the knowledge of which equilibrium we can through faith see that the existence of evil, sin, suffering, and sorrow in the world is consistent with the infinite goodness as well as with infinite wisdom of the Almighty. So he's saying, and this goes back to what he said about Lucifer bearing the light and, how it blinds sensual and selfish souls. He's saying that there is no devil as defined by Christianity, which is blasphemy. You cannot be a Christian and be a Mason. He says that this is just part of the infinite wisdom of God. It is not in controversy with God, but it is in harmony with God. So then why would, and earlier on he said something about, how a Mason shouldn't look down on another Mason for being evil, because then they're going to use the same scale on him, right? And really, it sounds good and all, but you have to fight evil. They're saying don't fight evil, accept it, learn to work with it, be enlightened and understand that the checkered floor symbolizes that there's light and darkness everywhere. You have to understand the balance and subjugate man with your intellect, to make a long story short. We'll get into that more in a second. Now, sympathy and antipathy, attraction and repulsion, each a force of nature, are contraries in the souls of men and in the universe of spheres and worlds, and from the action and opposition of each against the other, result harmony and that movement which is the life of the universe and the soul alike. They are not antagonists of each other. The force that repels a planet from the sun is no more an evil force than that which attracts the planet toward the central luminary. For each is created and exerted by the deity, and the result is the harmonious movement of the obedient planets in their elliptic orbits and the mathematical accuracy and unvarying regularity of their movements. Of that equilibrium between authority and individual action, which constitutes free government by settling an immutable foundation's liberty with obedience to law, equality with subjection to authority, and fraternity with subordination to the wisest and the best. This part is key. I wanted to wrap this up in one last 15-minute clip, but it turns out I'm going to have to make another because I need to explore this. Let me read it again. Of that equilibrium between authority and individual action, which constitutes free government by settling on immutable foundations, liberty with obedience to law, equality with subjection to authority, and fraternity with subordination to the wisest and the best. So they're saying, this idea that people, you've probably heard that Freemasons say, well, all Masons are equal. That's not what Pike is saying. And this is the 32nd degree chapter. This is the, there's only 2 pages after this. This is the middle of the third to the last page of the 32nd degree explanation to the the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite. And they're saying this is what you need to impress upon each one of these people in these degrees with the ceremonies and rituals and what have you. Okay? He's saying that these are immutable foundations Okay, of that equilibrium between authority and individual action, which constitutes free government by settling on immutable foundations, liberty with obedience to law. Like, you are free, but you must obey the law. Equality with subjection to authority. You are equal, but you must subject yourself to authority, which is, it's a contradiction, really, when you think about it. And fraternity with subordination to the wisest and the best. It's like, yes, we're all brothers, but you must, you're the subordinate of the more intelligent people, especially people like the grand architect of Masonry. And of equilibrium between the active energy of the will of the present expressed by the vote of the people, and the passive stability and permanence of the will of the past, expressed in constitutions of government, written or unwritten, and the laws and customs gray with age and sanctified by time as precedents, and authority which is represented by the ark resting on the two columns, Jachin and Boaz, that stand at the portals of the temple, builded by wisdom, on one of which Masonry sets the celestial globe, symbol of the spiritual part of the composite nature, and on the terrestrial globe, symbol of the material part. And finally, of that equilibrium possible in ourselves, and which Masonry incessantly labors to accomplish in its initiates, and demands of its adepts and princes, else unworthy of their title, between the spiritual and the divine, and the material and human in man, between the intellect, reason, and moral sense on one side, and the appetites and passions on the other, from which result the harmony and beauty of a well-regulated life. Which possible equilibrium proves to us that our appetites and senses also are forces given unto us by God for purposes of good, and not the fruits of the malignancy of a devil, to be detested, mortified, and, if possible, rendered inert and dead. That they are given us to be the means by which shall be strengthened and incited to great and good deeds, and are to be wisely used and not abused, to be controlled and kept within due bounds by the reason and the moral sense, to be made useful instruments and servants, and not permitted to become the managers and masters, using our intellect and reason as base instrument for their gratification. So basically what that's saying is that there's this equilibrium, there's this balance, okay, between the spiritual and the divine, the material and the human man, intellect, reason, etc. He says this intellect, and he says that this which possible equilibrium proves to us that our appetites and senses also are forces given unto us by God for purposes of good, and not fruits of the malignancy of the devil. So, basically that is a very gay-friendly statement, for example. He's saying, well, if you're a homosexual, for instance, these appetites are given to you by God for the purposes of good, and not for the malignancy of the devil, to be detested, mortified, and if possible rendered inert and dead. So this, what you're seeing there is a reference to things that homosexuals would agree with. They say, hey, if I feel this way, it's not because there's some devil, it's because there's a greater plan for it, and I'm going to pursue it. And that's why you see a lot of effeminate Masons, because part of what this is conducive for, or this allows for, this enables, this encourages even, is homosexuality and females' lust for power. They say, but you got to use your intellect and reason and so on. But then you're listening to, quote unquote, the wisest, you're listening to the wisest and the best. They use the word best of the fraternity, and you're a subordinate of them. Okay? So you can imagine where that goes. So if the wisest and the best are a bunch of queers, which they are because they worship the Baphomet among other deities, they'll say, well, I have this homosexual lust, and you're my subordinate. You can imagine where that leads to. Anyway, I think I have enough time to finish this page. And this equilibrium teaches us above all to reverence ourselves as immortal souls, and to have respect and charity for others who are even such as we are, partakers with us of the divine nature, lighted by a ray of divine intelligence, struggling like us toward the light, capable like us of progress upwards toward perfection, and deserving to be loved and pitied, but never to be hated nor despised, to be aided and encouraged in this life struggle, and not to be abandoned nor left to wander in the darkness alone, still less to be trampled upon in our own efforts to ascend. Well, let me stop there. Finish with one last clip.